Hello all, and in this video we will continue our discussion about the equivalent static force procedure or the equivalent lateral force procedure for the seismic analysis and design of buildings. And in this part we will cover the equivalent static force procedure as prescribed in the Uniform Building Code 1997 version. So let's continue. Let's first quickly check what are some of the major changes this Uniform Building Code 1997 have compared to the previous version, which was UBC 1994. The first change it has was the definition of soil profile types. Previously we were having 4 soil types: S1, S2, S3 and S4, and these soil types were independent of the level of ground shaking. Now in this UBC 97, these 4 soil types were expanded to 6 soil profile types, and now they are also dependent on the seismic zone factors. So there are 2 seismic zone factors defined by UBC 97, and they are denoted by CA and CV, and they are now related with the new soil types, and those new soil types are denoted now as SA, SB, SC up to SF. So there are now 6 soil types SA to SF, and the new soil types were based on soil characteristics for the top 30 meter of the soil, and there are 3 characteristics which you can have to classify whether your soil is SA type or SB or SC. Those 3 properties of soil are standard penetration test results, SPT value, N value, or the undrained shear strength, and the most important one is the shear wave velocity in top 30 meter of the soil, which is denoted as VS30. So that is the most important parameter which can be used to classify the soils. Another change which this UBC 97 have compared to UBC 94, that in addition to the 4 basic framing systems which were previously bearing wall system, building frame, moment resisting frame and the dual system, 2 new structural system classifications were introduced in this UBC 97, and these 2 were cantilever column systems and the shear wall frame interacting systems. There were changes in load combinations also. The UBC 97 seismic design provisions are based on the strength level design rather than service level design. So accordingly the load combinations were also modified. Another change was that in the UBC 97, the earthquake load, which is represented or denoted as E, is a function of both the horizontal and vertical components of the ground motion. So we will see that in calculating the earthquake loading or the final earthquake effects, we will combine the effects from both horizontal component and vertical component also, and UBC 97 guides us how we can combine these 2 effects. The design base shear expression was also modified. In previous version, the design base shear VB was inversely proportional to T raised to power 2 by 3. As you have also seen in the previous slides or previous part of this lecture series, that the previous versions of this base shear formula contained the base shear coefficient C, and that C was basically inversely proportional to T raised to power 2 by 3. But now in UBC 97, this VB or the base shear coefficient is now simple inversely proportional to only T and not T raised to power 2 by 3. So now we will have a base shear formula which will be simply inversely proportional to the time period of the structure. Also the minimum design base shear limitation for seismic zone 4 was also introduced. So there is a limitation now in UBC 97 that VB should not be less than a particular value for seismic zone 4, and that provision was introduced as a result of the ground motion that was observed at sites near the fault rupture in 1994 Northridge earthquake. So this earthquake resulted in our expansion of knowledge about how the structures are damaged in high seismic zones, especially the ones which are located near the fault ruptures. Another improvement was that in 1997 UBC, a simplified method for determining the design base shear V was introduced for buildings not more than 3 stories in height. So this code also provides us a simplified formula for very simple kind of low-rise buildings, and the application of that simplified expression for base shear is only applicable to these low-rise buildings. The next change is about the displacement and drifts. The UBC 97 displacements are determined from strength level earthquake forces and not the service level earthquake forces. And lastly, UBC 97 also provides us the new equations for determining the seismic forces for elements of the structure, non-structural components, and for example equipment. So for lateral forces on different elements of the structure, new empirical expressions were also included in this version of the building code. So let's see what is the new base shear expression prescribed in the 1997 version of the Uniform Building Code. So the UBC 97 form of the equation is this one. V, which is the base shear, is equal to CS into W. CS is the base shear coefficient, and it tells us how much percent of the weight of the building should be applied as the lateral forces representing the future earthquake, and that CS should be calculated using this expression. It is the function of CV, and CV is the hazard parameter basically. CV tells us how much high or low the level of hazard your site is having. So hazard parameter, you have the importance factor, this is the importance factor, and then you also have the response modification factor. In UBC 97, this response modification factor or R factor is called the overstrength factor. Overstrength factor, but you should note that it accounts for both ductility and overstrength. T is the time period, the approximate time period of the structure. And as the previous codes, UBC 97 also provides us the empirical expression for calculating this time period. So this time period will not be coming from the classical modal analysis, it will be just coming from an approximate formula. So UBC 97 provides these two formula for calculating this capital T. The response modification factor or the overstrength factor will be a function of the structural system, type of the structure basically, and that type will tell us how much ductile or brittle that structural system is. So it will be coming from a table, and that table will provide us the values of R for different kinds of structures based on their inherent ductility. CV is the velocity based ground response coefficient, and it is not only the function of seismic hazard, it also basically incorporates the effect of soil type. So when you go to this table 16R, you need to have your soil type as well as your hazard parameter to come up with this CV, and that hazard parameter will still be represented by a specific seismic zone. So the concept of zone will still be here, but instead of having the Z factor directly in the equation, we will use this Z factor along with the soil type S, A, B or C to come up with CV factor, which will be used in the base shear formula, and that will be in the table 16R of UBC 97. The chapter 16 of UBC 97 deals with the seismic analysis and design of structures. So now this formula is simple and can be used to calculate CS, the base shear coefficient. This is the actual provisions of the code. I have taken this screenshot from the chapter 16 of UBC 97. So here you can see V is equal to CVI over RT, which is CS basically, and multiplied by the seismic weight of the building. So now there are different limits on this base shear. For example, the total design base shear need not exceed the following. So this is kind of the maximum base shear which is allowed, and now it is a function of CA. CA is the seismic hazard coefficient for acceleration, similar to CV, which was the seismic hazard coefficient for velocity. So this CA will also be a function of your seismic zone and the soil type, which will be SA up to SF. Basically this SF soil is so soft that the general design provisions are not applicable to this SF soil type. So there are some special considerations which you should consider if your structure lies on a site having a soil type SF. But we will see that in a moment when we go to the CA and CV tables. The total design base shear shall not be less than the following. So this was V max. So this is V minimum. So this is the minimum loading which you should consider anyways. So this is V minimum. And now there is a special provision added for seismic zone 4, and that provision says that the total base shear shall also not be less than the following. So now we have another V minimum, and that is in addition to the previous V minimum, and that is only applicable to seismic zone 4. In this equation you have Z factor directly in the equation, and you also have the NV, which is the near source factor for velocity. So there are two new factors, NV and NA. NV is the near source factor for velocity and NA is the near source factor for acceleration. As the name indicates, they basically account for the effect of near source or pulse like ground motions in the base shear formula. If your site is close to the seismic source less than 10 kilometers, your source to site distance, for example, this is the seismic source, this is your site, and the minimum distance, for example, from source to site is less than 10 kilometer R, then you can experience a special kind of ground motion which is called the near source pulse like ground motion. And those special ground motions have an effect called the directivity effects, and under those special ground motions the response of the structure can be significantly different from the regular kind of ground motions which we experience if our site is away from the source. So in order to account for that effect, there is another minimum limitation specially prescribed for the seismic zone 4. We will see all these tables from which we will pick the values of CA, CV, NV and NA. For the calculation of approximate time period, the UBC 97 proposes two methods. One is a simple method and other is a relatively complex method. For simple method, which is called method A in UBC 97, T can be calculated using this expression. So the T is a function of a coefficient which is CT, and that CT is a function of the type of structure. So if you have steel moment resisting frame or RC moment resisting frame, you will have these two values, and for all other types of buildings you will have this value. Hn is the height of the structure, total height of the structure, and it will vary from structure to structure. The underlying assumption in this approximate formula is that the height of the structure can be simply related to the approximate time period of that structure through different constant coefficients. If your structure have shear walls, if it is not the simple moment resisting frame of either steel or concrete, if it has masonry shear wall or concrete shear wall, then the value of this CT can be taken as 0.1 over under root AC, where AC should be determined from this expression. In this expression you can see that there is an AE and DE, where this AE is the minimum cross-sectional area of shear wall in any horizontal plane in the first story, and obviously this is the area, so it will be in feet square or in meter square. And this DE is the length of the shear wall in the first story in the direction parallel to the applied forces. So if you have this wall, and let's say this is the plan view and you are applying forces in this direction, then this will be DE, this length which is parallel to the direction of applied loading, and A is the minimum cross-sectional area of shear wall in the first story. The value of DE over HN used in this formula shall not exceed 0.9. Most of the times this ratio will not exceed 0.9 because shear wall will be used mostly in mid to high rise buildings, and the dimension of planar walls will not be more than 90% of the height of the building. So this was the method A. The method B, which is relatively complex method, that prescribes the use of this formula, T is equal to 2 pi under root this expression, this Wi is the weight of a ith story. This delta I is the displacement of the ith story resulted due to the application of a lateral force vector, and that force vector basically should be in accordance with the principles of this formula or this formula or this formula or any other rational distribution. So this method basically proposed that you carry out the static analysis first for the structure, you apply forces, a pattern, and let's call that pattern as Fi. All these forces are Fi, I is the story number, and you calculate the static displacements at each story level, for example, and let's call those numbers as delta I, and then use this expression to calculate the time period. This expression basically is based on the assumption that you can idealize your structure as a single degree of freedom system. So basically this expression is very similar to the expression for time period we have for single degree of freedom system, which is 2 pi under root m over k. So you can see here that this g will be divided by this number. Obviously if you sum all the weights of each story, this Wi is the weight of the ith story. So this g will be dividing with that and you will get mass. And then if you check the units of this whole square root term, it will be basically, for example, Wi will be in, let's say, newtons, delta I will be, let's say, in meter square because it is square here, divided by the g value, which is meter per second square, multiplied by the sum of force vectors, which will be newtons, and then displacement, which will be in meters. So this Newton meter will be cancelled out with this Newton and 1 meter. The other meter will be cancelled out with this, and the square root term will only have s square units, and then we can cancel out this square with square root and we get the units as seconds. So basically this expression 30-10 is based on the same assumption that you idealize your whole structure just like a single degree of freedom system, and you can get the time period, approximate time period, using this expression. But obviously the value of time period will be highly dependent on the selection of this f vector. So if you select, for example, a triangular vector, you will get a different time period, and if you select a rectangular vector, you will get a different time period because the deflected shape of the building will be different. So if you want to idealize this time period as the first mode time period of the structure, ideally you should apply a force vector which deforms the structure exactly in the first mode shape. So that force vector will be having the shape of the first mode also, so that it can statically deform the structure in first mode shape. But anyways, most of the times we will be using this method A. Most of the practicing engineers prefer this method A because this is simple expression and is also applicable to most buildings. If you are talking about moment resisting frames, then you use this expression, and if you have shear walls also, you have this value of CT from this expression and then use the same formula. So the capital T or time period will basically be determined from this expression. So the overall procedure now to calculate the base shear and then distribute it along the story height can be summarized in following steps. For example, the very first step you should do is that you should determine your seismic zone factor, in which seismic zone your site lies, and then you also determine the seismic source type 1 or 2 or 3. Basically this seismic source type will be used to calculate the near source factors NA and NV from tables. Then you should also determine your soil type from SA up to SF, and then using the soil type and the seismic zone factor, you pick the ground response coefficient CA and CV. You also calculate the fundamental time period, and you also have to classify your structural system. You have to check which structural system your building has in lateral direction, and then you go to a particular table and pick the response modification factor R, also known as the overstrength factor in UBC 97. In all the codes after UBC 97, this factor is called the response modification factor. In Euro codes, this factor is called the behavior factor, and it is denoted by the alphabet Q. So then you have to determine the occupancy category, and that will help you in picking the value of importance factor from a particular table. And after this step 8, now you are ready to calculate the seismic base shear coefficient, because all the values are now given. You have CA, CV, R, time period, NA, NV, and you also have the soil type, and you also have the zone factor. So everything is now available, so you can calculate the value of CS, and you can also apply all the limits on that, the maximum value of base shear, the minimum value of base shear. All those checks now can be applied, and you can come up with the final base shear value. Now the last step would be that you vertically distribute this base shear into the lateral story forces. So you get already the resultant value for the equivalent force which the future earthquake will produce, V, and then you apply that resultant force at each story level, basically the part of the resultant force at each story level. If you sum all the forces, you will get the same number, and then you carry out the static analysis of your structure against these story forces. All the responses you get as a result of that static analysis will be called as seismic responses or seismic demands. So let's see some of the tables which you will be using to pick these factors. First is the table 16-1. Basically it tells us the seismic zone factor Z. So there are 5 seismic zones for US, which are 1, 2A, 2B, 3 and 4. So for each seismic zone you have the Z value. Then you also have this soil profile types table. So you can see here that soil profile types are SA up to SF, and you require any of these 3 soil properties in order to classify your soil. So you either have to have this VS30 value, it is the shear wave velocity in first 30 meter of the soil layer, or you should have the standard penetration test number SPTN value, or you can have undrained shear strength value. So the soil classes are basically made based on this VS30 value. If you have the VS30 value greater than 1500 meter per second, then you are having the hard rock, and then you can have rock or very dense soil or stiff soil, and then soft soil, and then a very special class SF, for which you have to check the site specific evaluation, and the normal general code procedure will not be applicable to this soil class. So as we go from SA up to SF, basically the stiffness of soil reduce. This is the seismic zone map for the United States, and that was based on the updated probabilistic seismic hazard assessment at the time of UBC 97. So you can see here, for example, zone 2A, 2A, and then maybe zone 1 here, zone 3 here, and towards the west coast you have zone 3 and 4 where the state of California is. You can see here zone 4 and then zone 3, zone 4. So all the west coast is basically a very seismically active part of the world. So once you get the zone for your site, you can pick the Z factor from table 16I. This table 16K is basically relating the occupancy category of your structure with the seismic importance factors. So you can read all these descriptions, and then you can classify your building in any of these categories. You can, for example, see here that for standard occupancy structures, you have a seismic importance factor of 1, and for structures, for example, hazardous facilities or essential facilities, you have a seismic importance factor of more than 1, which is 1.25. So most of the times normal ordinary structures will lie in this category and will have the seismic importance factor of 1. Table 16L, this one, and the next table, which is 16M, basically classifies the vertical and plan structural irregularities. So this 16L basically defines 5 types of vertical structural irregularity, and the description of all those 5 types is also given. Most of the time this description is self-explanatory. You can go through it and you can understand what that particular irregularity mean. For example, the very first vertical irregularity is called the soft story, and it is defined as a soft story is one in which the lateral stiffness is less than 70% of that in the above, or less than 80% of the average stiffness of the 3 stories above. So the story stiffness is basically the resistance of that particular story against lateral forces. So if there is a soft story in the structure, any lateral load analysis, static analysis, can identify that particular soft story, because you know already that K is equal to force over displacement. Moreover, you can also sum the lateral stiffness of all the elements in a particular story to get the story stiffness also. So there are different methods which you can use to calculate story stiffness, and we will discuss those methods in some other lecture or video. So the second vertical irregularity can be weight or mass irregularity. Mass irregularity shall be considered to exist where the effective mass of any story is more than 150% of the effective mass of an adjacent story. So similarly, you have the vertical geometric irregularity. If there is a sudden change in the dimensions along the vertical direction, and that change is also defined, you can read here. So you will have the vertical geometric irregularity in that case. In plane discontinuity in vertical lateral force resisting system. So for example, if you have moment resisting frame, so you will have, let's say, a series of columns and beams like this. And let's say, for example, you have an extended part of your building here like this. And let's say that you don't have this column here, let's say this one. And basically this column is supporting on a beam, and the other supporting column, which should be ideally underneath this column, is displaced from this location to a new location, which is this one. So let's say we don't have this continuity of the columns here. So let's say I don't have this column. So let me draw it again like this, and then I have like this. So let's say if this is the situation, and if this offset, this one, is greater than the length of this column, this one, so then your structure have the in-plane discontinuity in the vertical lateral force resisting system, which is the moment resisting system in this case. And the last case is the discontinuity in capacity, which is called a weak story. A weak story is one in which the story strength is less than 80% of that in the above story. The story strength is the total strength of all seismic resisting elements sharing the story shear for the direction under consideration. So if you are applying force in this direction, so the story strength for this particular story will be the sum of strengths of all of these elements, 3 columns, this one and this one. The sum of all these 3 strengths will be the story strength. So if any story have the strength less than 80% of the story above it, then it is called the weak story. So there is a concept of weak story which is related with the strength of a story, and there is a concept of soft story which is related with the lateral stiffness of that particular story. Similarly, in table 16M, you have the plan structural irregularities, and the most common one is the torsional irregularity. So these are the irregularities in plan. So if the distribution of mass and stiffness is such that the lateral force will produce significant torsional moments in the structure about the vertical axis, in that case the structure is supposed to have the torsional irregularity. If you are using the rigid diaphragm assumption, then you should consider that irregularity, because in that case the whole diaphragm will move together and the equivalent lateral force procedures will be applied to the center of masses of those diaphragms. And if there is a significant eccentricity available between the center of mass and center of rigidity, those seismic forces will result in the development of significant torsional moments in those diaphragms. So the torsional irregularity shall be considered to exist when the maximum story drift computed including the accidental torsion at one end of the structure transverse to an axis is more than 1.2 times the average of the story drifts of the 2 ends of the structure. So this is the specific check which you should apply to your structure in order to know whether your structure is torsionally irregular or not. So according to this check, for example, if you have this structure here and let's say it has a rectangular plan, so you have, let's say, this x-axis and this y-axis. So if you carry out the analysis in x direction against, let's say, these forces Fx, then you have to check the drifts at both of these ends, the lateral story drifts, and pick the maximum number. So maximum story drift at these two ends should be calculated and their average should be taken, and if the drift at any of these 2 points is greater than 1.2 times their average value, then your structure is supposed to have the torsional irregularity. When the analysis against this Fx is carried out, including the effect of accidental torsion. So for example, if your structure deforms in this manner, let's say this one, like this, maybe like this, so you have to calculate the story drifts at this corner in the deformed shape and at this corner in the deformed shape, and you also have to take their average, and if the maximum number of story drift is more than 1.2 times their average value, then the structure is supposed to have the torsional irregularity. And if you have this torsional irregularity, the code clause basically impose some additional requirements for structures like this. So you have to carry out a so-called torsional irregularity check also, which is defined here in this provision. You also can have another kind of plan irregularity, which is called the reentrant corners, and the definition of this reentrant corners is here. For structures with building footprint or plans like this shape, L shape, this one, the provision says that if you have, let's say, this dimension, which is the width of this line is, let's say, small a, and the total width is, let's say, this capital A, and in the other direction, let's say, if this one is, let's say, small b, and the total dimension is, let's say, capital B, if small a over capital A and small b over capital B, if these numbers are greater than 15%, which means greater than 0.15, then your structure is supposed to have this reentrant corners irregularity, and this is the type 2 of plan irregularity. The third irregularity is the diaphragm discontinuity. The diaphragms with abrupt discontinuities or variations in stiffness, for example, changes in thickness of the diaphragm, for example, including those having, for example, open areas and discontinuities, or the changes in effective diaphragm stiffness of more than 50%, for example. All of these are the indications that you have the diaphragm discontinuity. You can also have number 4, which is the out of plane offsets, discontinuities in the lateral force path, such as out of the plane offsets of the vertical elements. So if the lateral force path is not continuous, for example, the element which is supposed to transfer load to the other element, adjacent element, and that adjacent element is not there, you will have a discontinuity, and in that case you will have the type 4 irregularity. You can also have the last type 5 irregularity, which is the non-parallel systems. The vertical lateral load resisting system elements are not parallel to or symmetric about the major orthogonal axis of the lateral force resisting system. So for example, if the two major orthogonal axes of the buildings are, let's say, x and y, strong and weak directions of the building, and the local axis of the elements which are part of the lateral force resisting system is not parallel to this global x and y, which are the strong and weak directions of the building, in that case also you may have a plan irregularity. For example, if the strong and weak axes of the building are x and y directions respectively, and if you have, for example, a shear wall system which is in the direction not parallel to either x or y direction of the building, in that case you can have a non-parallel systems and you can have this type 5 kind of irregularity. So you have to check for all of these plan and vertical irregularities, and there are special code provisions for structures having these kind of irregularities, and you have to check those provisions also. Then you have a very important table, which is table 16N, and that table basically gives you two parameters. One is the R factor and other is the structural overstrength. R factor is the response modification factor or the overstrength factor, accounting for the effects of ductility and overstrength. This omega factor is called the structural overstrength, and it is supposed to apply or amplify the design forces of certain elements which are intended to remain elastic. So while you are reducing the design forces, for example, from elastic values, let's say this is V and this is your ZICW, as I have explained in last slide, or if you are following UBC 97, in that case it will become CVI over T. So everything except R factor will be this number, this point. And when you are applying the R factor, what you are doing is that you are bringing down the elastic forces to the design values. So this point corresponds to CVI over R into T, this point or this point. So as I have explained in last part of this lecture series, that by doing this you are giving a less capacity to your structure and you are intentionally allowing it to yield at this level. So the structure will yield at this level and will follow this line, maybe with some overstrength, this line, this one. But at the same time, you don't want all of the elements to yield at the same time. So for example, if all of the structure, all of the elements, columns, beams and every component of the structure yields at this specific point, then you can also have the problem with dynamic stability of the structure, because your structure may have, for example, some critical elements. Let's say a transfer girder. For example, you have a column and you don't have a continuous column at this story, the bottom story. So you will have a transfer girder here, and you don't want this transfer girder to yield in a design earthquake, because in that case the failure of the structure will be catastrophic. So for those critical elements, the codes allow to amplify their design forces from this number by applying a structural overstrength factor, which is denoted as omega. So this overstrength factor is supposed to amplify the design forces corresponding to these forces reduced by R. You again amplify those forces for the purpose of design of those critical elements. And that amplification factor is this structural overstrength, which is mostly in the range of 2.2 to 2.8 in UBC 97. And that factor is also part of the latest codes now. So the underlying idea is the same for all the latest codes also. So now you are familiar with another seismic design factor, which is not the part of the base shear formula itself, but it is an important seismic design factor because it applies to some special components of the structure which are not intended to be yielded during the design level earthquake, which are the critical elements. And if these elements are failed or yielded during the design level earthquake, the dynamic stability of the overall structure can be compromised. So for each structural system type, for example, bearing wall system, building frame system, then moment resisting frame system, and for example the dual systems and the other two new systems included in UBC 97, the value of R and the value of overstrength factor, structural overstrength factor, are given in this table. The moment resisting frame system is classified further as the special moment resisting frame, and for those frames you are allowed to have a very high value of R, which means they are very ductile frames. So R value is 8.5, which means that you are allowed to reduce the elastic forces by a factor of 8.5 if your moment resisting frame qualifies for the special moment resisting frame system. So there are very strict requirements, very strict detailing requirements which you have to follow in order to get qualified as the special moment resisting frames. So it's not that you just assign this category to your structure or start calling your structure as the SMRF. You have to follow or satisfy all those very strict detailing requirements and confinement requirements so that you result in a structure with very high ductility and that deserves that very high R value. So the underlying idea is that if you don't pay too much attention to the detailing requirements and the confinement of your concrete in your elements, then you will be going for this ordinary moment resisting frame, and the R value corresponding to that will be low. So in that case, you will be designing for higher values of design base shear, which means that you will be having more reinforcement and more cross section sizes, and this cost is basically the cost of not making your structure ductile. Similarly, if you follow some requirements, you can qualify for the intermediate moment resisting frame, and if you follow all the requirements, very strict requirements, you can qualify for the SMRF. So all of these requirements you should check in the relevant building codes and seismic design guidelines. So maybe we will discuss these requirements in some other video lecture, but currently you can just pick the value of R if you qualify for any of these three levels of moment resisting frame systems based on their ductility. So then you have two tables for CA, seismic coefficient CA and CV, and as I have explained earlier, that having the value of Z, which means the seismic zone factor, and the soil type, you can pick the value of CA and CV. You can see here that as you are going towards higher value of Z and softer soils, which means you are going down, you are having a higher values of coefficients. So here you can see that the coefficient is a function of NA, which is the near source factor for acceleration. So there is a separate table for this near source factor, and if you are in zone 4, you have to calculate the CA value as a function of near source factor for acceleration. Same is here for CV factor. You can see here that for zone 4 you have these values, but for zone 1, 2A, 2B and 3 you have the values of CV from this table. This is the seismic source type which is required to pick the near source factor in next table. So you can have seismic source type as A, B or C, and the description is here that A means that faults that are capable of producing large magnitude events and that have a high rate of seismic activity with magnitude 7, and the slip rate for that particular fault should be greater than 5 mm per year. If all of these requirements are fulfilled, then you will classify your seismic source type as the seismic source type A. So you must have the information about the seismic source which is governing the seismic hazard at your site. So ideally speaking, you must have the results of what we call as the seismic deaggregation analysis to know that this is a particular seismic source which is governing the seismic hazard at my site. The seismic source type B means all others which don't follow in the category of A or C, and C means the faults that are not capable of producing the large magnitude earthquakes. So if the slip rate is less than 2 mm per year and the maximum magnitude expected from that particular seismic source is less than 6.5, you will classify it as C. And if you are somewhere in between, then you will have the seismic source type as B. So having classified your most governing seismic source at your site, you will go to these tables and pick the near source factors NA and NV. You need to know the closest distance to the known seismic source, and if it is less than 2 km, 5 km or greater than 10, you have to use the value of seismic source type to pick the value of NA from this table and NV from this table. Obviously, as you are going more close to your seismic source, if your site for example locates very close to seismic source, which means less than 5 km or at 5 km for example, the value of NA and NV are greater than 1. But for sites which are lying far from the seismic sources, which means greater than 10 km, then they cannot have the near source pulse like ground motions, and in that case the values of NA and NV are 1. So the overall procedure for using these tables you have seen already. You have a table for R factor, you have a table for soil profile types, you have a table for seismic zone factor, and you also have a table for seismic source type as we have seen, and the distance to source and the importance factor table. So all of the tables we have seen already. So we are now in a position to pick all the factors and calculate CS, which is our ultimate target in this calculation. And once we calculate V is equal to CS into W, we can distribute these base shear values along the height of the structure. So we already have this base shear, the total V. Now we have to divide it along the height of the building in order to get the story forces to be applied to your structure. One important thing here is you should be careful about what should be included in the seismic weight of the building. It is not simply defined as the dead load of the building. It has a specific definition, and that definition is the total dead load plus 25% of the live load. 25% of the live load. So it is based on the assumption that when the earthquake forces hit the structure, 25% of the live load will also be present at that time. So this should be also included in the seismic weight of the building. And also you should note that any particular equipment which is permanently installed or any live load which is permanently installed in the building, that should also be considered as a dead load. So this live load is the one which is really varying from day to day basis, and the weight of any permanent fixtures in the building should not be considered as live load in calculation of this capital W, which is the seismic weight of the building. So once you calculate this V value, you have to distribute, and the distribution formula is this one, and it says that you should first calculate a value called Ft from this formula, Ft, and this is the force which should be applied at the top story. So at the top value you should have this Ft, and it should be equal to 0.07 into approximate time period into the total base shear. The remaining value of forces, once you apply the Ft at top from this total V, the remaining force should be divided by this formula using this expression, which means that a particular ith story will have force equal to Fi, and that can be calculated from this formula. So if you see this formula, basically you have to have the weight of that particular X story, the height of that particular X story, divided by the sum of weights of all the stories and heights, the summation of all those, and then you will get this Fx value for a particular X story. So this Ft force basically is intended to account for the higher vibration mode effect, because essentially what we are doing when we are using this formula is that we are distributing the remaining forces in a triangular manner if the story masses and heights are same. So for a regular kind of building which have the same story heights and same mass of each story, this formula will result in exactly the triangular kind of distribution, because it is a linear formula, you can see here. So all the remaining forces basically will be applied in a triangular manner. But this additional Ft which will be applied at the top story is meant to account for the effects of higher vibration modes, because the triangular distribution of all other forces is only meant to account for the first vibration mode of the structure, because the first vibration mode of mostly low to mid-rise buildings is close to triangular shape of deflection. And since this analysis method recommends only one lateral load pattern to be representative of the future earthquake loading, and in contrast your building can have significant contributions from other modes of vibration also, second mode or third mode, so to implicitly account for their effects, you have to apply a fixed value of force Ft, which will be basically part of this V, to account for all those effects implicitly. So once you have distributed all those forces to each story level, you can carry out the static analysis, F is equal to Ku, to come up with all the displacement and internal forces and moments and shears, everything. And then you have to apply few checks on the results. For example, let's say first is the maximum inelastic displacement, which is expected to occur during the design level earthquake. So for example, let's go back to the same figure which we are using, this one, the base shear versus the roof displacement, and here we have the elastic base shear, which was in this case CVI over T, everything except R value. So this is, let's say, this number, And what you have done is that you have applied the R value, so you have now CVI over RT. So this force vector which you will be applying to your structure is basically the story forces which are distributed from the base shear, and those story forces already have the R factor. So basically this force vector is coming from CV over RT. So you have applied this, for example, and then you calculated the response of the structure. So if you apply these forces, basically you are taking your structure from this level, 0 level, to this point if you are applying these forces. So your structure is now at this point, but the elastic values are higher, these ones. When the design level earthquake will come, you have provided the capacity far lower than the elastic value based on the R factor. So your structure will yield at this point. So you will have yielding at this point, and let's say this is the final point where your design earthquake takes your structure after it ends. But here is an incompatibility here, that for example this is the straight line and you have applied forces which are far lower than the elastic value, which means that the displacement from your structural analysis which you will be getting, for example the roof displacement, that will be this number, and let's call it, let's say, delta S, and this will be coming from the analysis against reduced forces. But here you have seen that your intention was that your structure yield at this point and the displacement after yield will still be increasing. Your analysis will be giving you this number delta S because it is a static analysis against reduced forces. So you will be getting this delta S as a result of that static analysis. But in fact, the real situation was that your structure yielded during the design earthquake, and after yielding its displacement keep on increasing up to a certain value, which is the maximum inelastic displacement as written here. So let's call that maximum inelastic displacement as delta M, and that delta M will be significantly greater than this delta S which you will be getting from your elastic analysis against reduced forces. So this means that you have to amplify this delta S to reach to this delta M number, and that delta M will be the real displacement corresponding to the design earthquake, not this delta S. So the code recommends that you have to additionally modify your delta S, which will be coming from your reduced force analysis. So this is from analysis. You have to increase that number by this factor, which is 0.7 into R in UBC 97, to get the maximum inelastic displacement. So this is an additional modification which you have to perform over the displacement responses. In fact, all the responses related to displacement, for example interstory drift ratios also, and the other deformation related responses. So this 0.7 into R can be considered as an amplification factor to be applied only to displacements after the analysis. So that amplification factor in later versions of the building codes, for example from IBC 2000 onwards, this is called as the CD factor, which is the amplification factor for displacement. But for UBC 97, that factor is 0.7 into R. So for example, if your R was, for example, 8, you have to multiply it with 0.7 to get some number and apply it to this delta S to get the delta M value. So the difference between delta S and delta M is the amplification factor, which is 0.7 into R in this case. And then you have to calculate the story drifts based on this maximum inelastic displacement response, and that is delta M. And there are two checks which you should satisfy for compliance of this building code, and that is for structures having the time period capital T less than 0.7 second, the drift limit is the 2.5% of the story height. But for structures which have more time period, which means they are taller structures, the drift limit is 2%. So you have to satisfy these two story drift limits in order to implicitly ensure the satisfactory performance of the building during design earthquake. Another important factor to consider here is the effect of torsional moments, and the code says that even if you have no eccentricity between center of mass and center of rigidity, Still you should include the accidental torsion, which means that it is a minimum amount of torsion which you should artificially induce in your structure while applying the loadings, in order to account for those effects which are not explicitly taken into account during the analysis formulation. So for example, if you have this structure, and although you know already theoretically that the center of mass and center of rigidity are exactly at the same point, the building is exactly symmetrical, still there can be some uncertainties in these calculations. Still the center of mass, for example, can displace in real scenario in a real building. The instantaneous changes, for example, in the configuration or design or the layout of some particular element can affect this center of mass, and you can have some eccentricity which was not originally intended. For all those specific scenarios, to account for all those scenarios, the code recommends to consider an accidental torsion, which means that if you are applying forces in the x direction, for example Fx, you should consider that there is still an eccentricity between CR and CM, which is equal to 5% of the building dimension in the perpendicular direction. So let's say, for example, if this dimension of the building is capital B, then this eccentricity should be 0.05 times of B between CR and CM. And it is a hypothetical eccentricity. If there is a real eccentricity, there will be actual inherent torsional moments. But these accidental torsional moments are in addition to those inherent torsional moments, and that should be equal to some eccentricity which you are assuming multiplied by the perpendicular dimension of the diaphragm. And that 5% number is mostly recommended in different building codes and different building guidelines. So it's like basically introducing an artificial torsional moment at each story level, which will serve as an additional force to result in some additional capacity, and that capacity will act as a kind of an additional factor of safety also. But in the cases where torsional irregularity also exists explicitly as defined in the table 16M, as we have seen, there is a specific check for that. If you apply that check and you found out that your structure is torsionally irregular also, in that case the effect of that torsional irregularity should be accounted by increasing the accidental torsion at each level by an additional amplification factor, and that amplification factor is this one, and that factor is equal to delta max, which is the maximum displacement at level x, divided the average of the values of displacement at the extreme points or corners of the structure at level x, multiplied by 1.2, and then square of the whole thing. So this is an additional amplification factor which you should apply to the effects of accidental torsion in order to account for the torsional irregularity. You should note that the torsional irregularity is a different topic and torsional stability is another topic. So you should not confuse torsional irregularity effects with torsional stability. So for example, if you found out that your structure is torsionally unstable, no matter how hard you try to comply to all of these clauses to account for torsional irregularities, your structure is not going to sustain the torsional moments caused by design earthquake level. So that is a topic for another video lecture, but you should not confuse with torsional irregularity checks with torsional stability of the structure. One last thing in this discussion about the ELF procedure in UBC 97 is the orthogonal effects. For regular and symmetric kind of structures, for example this one, the code prescribes that you apply the lateral effective forces in x direction and in y direction, and then using those forces you calculate the seismic effects by combining the lateral and vertical components of the ground motion, and those lateral seismic effects are included in the load combinations, and the governing load combination should be used for the design of elements. But here you also have to check an additional thing, and that is if your structure has plan irregularity type 5, or if for example the irregularity number 1 or a column of a structure forms part of two or more intersecting lateral force resisting system. In all of these cases you have to combine the x directional forces with y directional forces also, and that is called the accounting for orthogonal effects. The requirement that orthogonal effects be considered may be satisfied by designing such elements for 100% of the prescribed design forces in one direction plus 30% of the prescribed design forces in the perpendicular direction. So if any of these situations exist, you apply force in x direction plus 30% of the y direction, and same you do for y direction plus 30% of x direction. So you have an additional directional combination in certain particular cases which you have to apply. So that you can combine at either design case level in software or at design load combination level. At both levels you can do that, but you have to account for that effect in case you have these kinds of irregularities. The combination requiring the greater component strength shall be used for design. So whatever, for example, if you are designing a beam, a particular beam, and you have to design the longitudinal reinforcement, for example, the bending moment coming from both of these cases, the maximum should be used for deciding the reinforcement. Alternatively, the effects of the two orthogonal directions may be combined on a square root of the sum of square bases. So you can also do this thing, that for example x direction forces square plus y direction forces square under root. So this is the SRSS combination for directions, and different software also allow you to have this combination. So this is an alternate of this thing, this x plus 30% of y and y plus 30% of x. So you can use that one also. So these are the two options for the orthogonal effects in three-dimensional structures which you should consider in case your structure have any of these irregularities. So that's all about the discussion of this ELF procedure in the UBC 97, and we will continue this discussion in next part of this lecture series, and in that part we will discuss the equivalent lateral force procedure as prescribed in the International Building Code 2000 onwards. So that procedure has several radical changes compared to UBC 97, and all the latest building codes are also based on those changes. So that we will discuss in next part of this video lecture series. Till then, stay safe and thank you.